Hi there, friend. My name is John Werner. I used to be a part of the largest cult in the United States. After studying the Bible, Christian history, and ministry, I set my sights on confronting the problematic nature of white evangelicalism in the United States. In 2019, I published my first book as a first step in addressing the subtle issues of this complex system. This podcast will continue that work under the same title. Welcome to The Cult of Christianity. Hey y'all, just popping in to say this is one of the most different episodes I've done to date. I wanted to give a content warning for it, but I don't think I wanted to do quite the same kind of alert that I typically throw before an episode. I usually signal caution if triggering ideas of abuse, suicide, or torture are detailed or mentioned. And while there certainly is abuse and torture in this story, this is more triggering in the sense that it may be upsetting for someone with PTS from psychological type torture. So the tone my guest and I use is somewhat lighthearted at points, but this is not to gloss over how intense this story is and how hard it may be for certain listeners to hear. So I hope you're able to listen and learn, but if your headspace isn't conducive for hearing an intense account of torture, maybe skip this one. And as always, take care of yourself. On today's show, a friend of mine is coming on. This episode might look a little different than some of the other ones, but I'm really, really excited for it. So first off, Finn, thank you for coming on.
It's great to be on here.
Yeah, it's fun. The way I know you, you married one of my childhood best friends, and so you and I have hung out before. And one of those times we were hanging out, we were at a pool, and you just told me kind of this crazy story about what happened to you. And I was like, man, I need to get this on the podcast. And full disclosure, obviously with this podcast, I get, a lot of people have told me a lot of crazy stories. So it's hard for me to be shocked by much anymore. But I try to steer away from talking about crazy stories because sometimes people dismiss that as oh, that was just one crazy instance. Whereas a lot of what I try to do is show how not the crazies that happen to be Christians, but how Christians can kind of make crazies. And so, but for this, I think it's very, very interesting. So I'm super thrilled you're willing to share about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fairly open about my life and everything. I thought this would be a pretty interesting opportunity. I don't know if we've ever actually talked about this, but I am actually still a Christian, believe it or not.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind
Good
of
on
interesting.
I'm sure it is. I'm sure there was a lot of changes that happened. So how did you relate to Christianity, let's say before high school? What was kind of your relation to it?
Well, I grew up in a very Christian household. It was the 90s. So, Christianity took kind of a little bit of a different form back then. It was non-denominational wasn't super popular at that time. It was more, you had to fall into a category like Baptist or Zionist or Lutheran or whatever. So that's kind of, I grew up in a Baptist church, and we went to church every Sunday. They always, our parents would hand us money to put in the offering jar as they passed it around, that kind of thing. Which I always thought was, even as a child, I thought that was weird.
Yeah. So it was almost just kind of cultural. You just, did you really picture much of life outside of church, or was that kind of just so built into your life?
I mean, I don't want to say it was life because I did have a life outside of it, but a lot of what I did ended up revolving around not necessarily the church and the church functions, but around the people that were at the church. So a lot of my childhood friends, we went to church. I don't think we really have any kind of connections with any of them anymore, but, I met them all through my parents and going to church with, my parents knew their parents from church. And then they basically all had kids at around the same time. So we kind of just all were friends.
Gotcha. So were you more I'll ask it this way. Did how you relate to Christianity change at all as you kind of became a teenager?
Absolutely. I mean, you grow older, you get hormones, kind of start thinking about life a little bit differently. You start thinking for yourself, and you start questioning things. And traditional churches are just not very great at answering questions. A lot of questions get redirected back to, well, the Bible says, but that's, in my opinion, not necessarily what you should be. It is what you should be looking at, kind of, but at the same stance, also no. Morality is really what the topic of discussion for Christianity is, but it's not necessarily what Christianity is about, I guess.
Yeah, well, and it's certainly in that time there was like very, the technical word would be biblicism, right? Where it was just kind of this high view of like, well, the Bible, some verse somewhere has the answer to any question. And that's kind of a weird pocket of Christianity. For most of Christianity's existence, that's not really how it's been perceived. But I'm sure growing up, that was kind of the messaging you were getting.
Yeah, I mean, definitely that's the case. Like a lot of Christianity, well, the Bible says this, the Bible says that. And as I grew older and, I guess as this story will develop, you'll kind of understand that, I really have always kind of questioned, the nature of Christianity, throughout my life. And even though I am still a Christian, there's a lot of things that I just don't agree with. A lot of, pastors, but also just, in general, people's beliefs about the Bible.
Definitely. Okay. So would it be fair to paint the picture of you kind of being a skeptical Christian growing up, or were you like on fire for Jesus? How would you describe kind of your personality related to it?
I would say it ebbed and flowed like a lot of people's stories, I'm sure. But when I was a child, I didn't question a whole lot of things. So I was pretty devout. And then as I got older, sort of into my, preteens and stuff, I kind of got, to the point where, I didn't understand a lot of it. And I didn't really understand why I believed in it and stuff like that. And so really it just led to, more questions than answers. And I just kind of wavered a bit. And then towards my teens, I got involved with like youth groups and people that were starting to be like there was a period of my life where, we moved, actually when I was 14. And 4 years before that, I believe our church, broke up. So like when I was around 10 to 14, we didn't really have like a church that we were in consistently. So I didn't really get any answers to a lot of the questions that I may have had about my faith or anything like that. And then once we moved, there was, a couple of years where we were kind of moving from here and there. And then once we actually settled, we did finally find a church, and I started to go into the youth group and everything like that. And, we went on some mission trips and stuff, and then we went to like New York and stuff like that. So I kind of like developed a small relationship with the people at the church between about 16 to 18.
Gotcha. Okay. So you would say in high school you're kind of getting more. Were you enjoying the church culture more as a teenager? Because for me, like my experiences, I was like a super devout, nerdy Christian, but like I didn't like the culture. But like sometimes it goes the other way too, where people have really good experiences at church, even if there's still some unanswered questions. Where do you think you fit into all of that?
I definitely feel like I fit in a little more with the culture. It was a little bit more, I guess, open and a little bit more accepting at the time. So I feel like it was a culture thing, not necessarily a belief thing. I think, in my head, I thought it was belief, but, looking back, it was more like I was getting that sense of acceptance and that feeling of being a part of something. And that I think was what I really drove me, during those years.
Gotcha. Okay, that paints a picture of you just kind of being somewhat satisfied where you're at. So let's get into the actual story though. So how did your misadventure begin?
I would definitely say the adventure began when I was in that youth group. I met a man. I guess for purposes, I won't, name any names or anything like that, but I met someone there, and we kind of became friends, and then he went off to Texas to learn about some kind of new program that was being started up. And a couple of years later, he came back, and that was right when I graduated high school, and he decided to start up a leadership academy at the church that was based out of the church. So it was a quote unquote leadership academy. I don't exactly know how to define 100% what went on, but, people will be able to understand that it's not really definable. It wasn't leadership. To me, I do not, now that I'm 30, I have a business. I've been to college more times than I can count. I've got tons of moves, like met so many different people, been under so many different management styles. I do not think that they taught leading at that church. It was a more so like a culture of what it means to be a leader, maybe in the church, but not what it means to be a leader, because being a leader in a church is, I can tell you from experience, 100% different than being a leader in the real world.
Definitely. Did this leadership academy have any kind of like cool name or anything like that? Not that you have to name it.
Yeah, it was called 24/7 Leadership Academy. That was it.
Okay. And this was, you said, sprung out from the church. So to your knowledge, this wasn't necessarily like a national thing. This was just something your church decided to do?
So it was a program that I believe was just kind of circulating at the time. I don't know if it's still going on. I have no idea. I do know for a fact that it is not going on at the church that I attended. It lasted for 3 years, and during the third year, the program got shut down because, and I mean, realistically, as the story goes on, you'll understand why it was a good idea to shut the program down, because ultimately so here's the thing. I'll just go ahead and preface what I'm going to talk about with a few of the rules and stuff of the Leadership Academy.
That'd be great.
So, when you join the Leadership Academy as a first year student, which means, it doesn't really matter the age range. The age can be anything. For me, it was 18. I was out of high school. I decided to do that instead of college. So, but there was a 25-year-old, I believe we even had a 30-year-old. So the age range varied. But the rule was you could not date anyone during your first year, in the Leadership Academy. I don't know why that is, but ultimately it led to a lot of problems, because when you take someone that is fresh out of high school and you say, look, you can't even be interested in someone, it's just kind of like, I mean, at that point you start getting desperate, right?
Yeah, you're suppressing people.
You're literally
you're suppressing their development. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's already red flag one. What were some of the other rules they had?
Um, so it wasn't so much rules; it was just more of like how everything was structured. So, the essential structure of everything went down like this: like they had a workout program. So, every morning at like 7 o'clock, you worked out for between an hour to an hour and a half. That in and of itself was actually probably one of the best things about the program, in my opinion. It definitely created structure. It created a lot of the fitness lifestyle that I enjoyed for up until a few years ago when I've been slacking, and now I'm starting to pay the
It's
price.
okay. Yeah, we all reach an age where we're like, oh, this is actually hard now to
Right.
stay in shape. Yeah, but that makes sense that it was good. And just quick clarification: so is
Yeah.
this is this a place you're going to? Like, are there like dorms you're staying in, or is this something you're kind of like? Is this like something you attend each day, or are you like bunking with people in this academy?
So that was actually another rule that we had was, as a first year student, you actually got bunked in with a home, quote unquote home, somebody that would, host you for the year, and they paid for your food. You got a room to go into, which I don't think that was a great idea. And the reason is, if it is someone that's fresh out of high school, you're only delaying the knowledge that they need to function, right? So you're only delaying you have to have that experience of like being on your own and buying your own food and making sure that you're doing your own laundry and stuff like that. Otherwise, you're staying with your parents for another year, or you're staying with your parents for however long you're in the program. 4 years, I believe, was the kind of peak of the program.
So they're modeling it almost after college, but they're not exactly teaching classes, are they?
There were some classes, yeah. So the general day-to-day structure, like I said, we did the workout in the mornings, and then after that, we would do prayer for like an hour, and then we would write sermons for 30 minutes, and then present sermons for the next about hour and a half. And then after that, you would have classes understudied with the different employees of the church. So you might have a class with the pastor that lasted an hour. You might have a class with the financial advisor that might tell you about some functions of the church financing or something like that. It varied all the time, and sometimes they didn't have anything planned, and we would go do some kind of like exercise or leadership exercise or something like that for like team building. So that's really kind of how it went down day to day. But they did have like larger events and stuff that we would do that would take up weeks at a time.
Gotcha. Okay, so it's kind of like, and pardon my harshness, but it's a little bit like indoctrination boot camp, right? Like it's I mean, I went to Bible college, and we did a lot of stuff in a more academic sense. But what you're talking about seems very seems like it would take a lot of your day of just focusing on pretty much one thing, whether it be Jesus or their version of leadership or what have you. That's a pretty intense schedule. That is what I hear.
I mean, it was 9 to 5. I think the weekend, I'm trying to remember if we even got the weekends, because we really didn't.
Well, it's called 24/7, right? So
right.
I mean,
I'm fairly certain we actually did not get. We may have gotten like a half day on Fridays. I think we would still do the workouts, I believe, or it wasn't a workout. It was like basketball or so, or it was exercise, but it was a different kind of exercise. And then you'd get like a half day. It's so hard to remember now because it's been 12 years. Oh gosh.
Yeah, we're getting old, man. We're getting old. Okay, so this is kind of your life. And just one more clarification:
Mhm.
this is all 18 and up?
Yeah, it is all 18 and up. So
Okay,
you did have to be out of high school.
okay,
And there was a couple of reasons for that, I guess, but ultimately it was just, I guess, kind of a time thing. You had to have
yeah.
time availability.
Yeah, and like you said, you chose this kind of over college, right? Did you,
Yeah.
just out of curiosity about you, did you have like a goal? Were you wanting to be a pastor, or were you just wanting to learn leadership? What was kind of your draw to it?
So I believe, and I mean, here's the thing. I didn't really know. I don't think I ever knew what I actually wanted to do with my life until I started doing automotive. And I was like, it's not necessarily what I want to do with my life, but working on things, figuring things out and building things is what I want to do. And that was just 8, 9 years ago. I mean, it wasn't really that long ago. For most of my life, it was just kind of like a limbo of like, oh, I could do this or I could do that, but like, do I have any real prospects or is anything lined up or am I going to research anything? Not really. So I think the reason that I was there was just kind of like, I didn't want to go to college. I didn't like the education system. I didn't want to go to a community college. There are some things that you can go to a community college for that are going to be worth it, but ultimately, in my experience, it's few and far between. So I just wanted to do something other than college.
Gotcha. And was this academy? I'm assuming it was at least cheaper, but was it free or subsidized by the church or anything?
It was not free. I mean, it was like, it wasn't extremely expensive. It was like $1,500 a semester.
Okay.
And
Yeah. Well, compared to college, that's
right,
nothing.
compared to
Yeah.
college, that's nothing. And then I think, food and stuff like that. So
Sure. Sure. Okay. Gotcha. Okay. So when did hit the fan? When did it start getting a little bit crazy?
it started getting a little bit crazy pretty early on. I mean, so, and now I will say my personal experience in this leadership academy was far more complicated and worse than I think anybody else's ever had been. There's, I mean, countless stories that I could pull from. I'm kind of gonna like summarize most of everything, because getting into detail, we would literally be here all night. So, um, let's just start kind of with the first, like, what it felt like, what they kind of like made everything feel like. They kind of made everybody feel like, oh, we are literally all in this together, like, guys, you're going to get your hair cut, like, you're going to have a buzz cut, like, it's going to be a new you. Everybody got, well, not everybody, some people got like kind of new names, kind of
Okay, I
nicknames,
already have
stuff
to
like
slow
that.
down. I
Sure.
already have to slow down just for a couple things. First off, I wanted to ask this earlier. Was this only men in this academy?
It actually was not.
Okay.
So it was co-ed. There was one female and then there was four, including me, male. So 5 total students. Not that
Okay.
many.
Gotcha. And so they're saying men cut your hair, and then what the new names? I'm very interested about that too.
So it was either like you either got to pick a new name or you were just given like a nickname just to be referred to.
Okay, almost like camp. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, just kind of like camp, right? And so they kind of gave off exactly like you said, this camp mentality, like, uh, oh, it's going to be fun. This is going to be great. And I was like getting kind of hyped up. Our first event was like it was a really cool event. So the first thing that we did, for an event, and these events were kind of like the staples or like this is what you looked forward to. This is what things built up to. Like, these events were what was supposed to test you and like, put the things that you've learned into practice, right? So, it was about a month in, I believe, we did our first event. And that was going up to a mountain in, I think, Tennessee or something like that. I can't remember where it was. But so we hiked about 10 miles, maybe, I don't know, maybe not even that far, maybe 8. We hiked about 8 miles into the woods. At each kind of mile marker, we would stop, and we all had to carry eggs with us wrapped in a handkerchief, and you had to make sure your egg didn't break, because that's what you were supposed to be eating that night. So if your egg broke, you didn't get to eat. Kind of a leadership exercise, make sure you're keeping the thing. I mean, it's a stretch, but we got it. So,
yeah, I'll pause there just
sure.
to say, like, there's the old keeping the egg intact thing is a tale as old as time, but over an 8-mile hike, that's already taking it kind of to an extreme.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's not the extreme part. So,
right.
we stop them, and during the times that we're stopping, we're also doing leadership exercises. The final exercise was for someone to be blindfolded while someone else gave instructions on how to put together a tent. That one was a pretty good one. And then there was also like starting a fire. Had to start a fire with nothing but sticks. Me and one other guy, we were in Boy Scouts, so like no problem. So we showed everybody how to start a fire with, sticks or rocks, and some string or shoelaces. And then the next day is when things kind of taken to the next level. The next day we woke up came out of our tents, and they had one cot, which a cot is, a device that you sleep on, and usually also can be used as like a stretcher for like taking people. So it was like kind of the stretcher kind. So it had 2 handles on the end. And so the whole premise was that you had to carry someone up the mountain.
Did they say who had to be carried, or were you?
It was actually an alternating thing. So
okay.
Each person in our group spent 1 hour on the cot, and we had to take. It was like the hardest trail up the mountain to the peak from the base. So we did. I mean, it took all day. It really took all day. I mean, we started coming down, and it was dark when we started coming down. But we would alternate one person on the cot, and we would alternate the 2 people that would be carrying the cot, one person in front and one person in the back. It was precarious. We almost died multiple times. I mean, there was bees. We got stung by bees. It was not great. I mean, it was an interesting experience, but I just don't know how intelligent it was to let people carry.
Right. Well, how many instructors or leaders are present for this?
So there was the instructor or the head person, and then there was what they call a third year and a second year, which just refers to obviously the year that you are in the program, and they're considered the leaders or the higher ups of the program. They have some training in medicine, but they're not, there's no EMTs on standby. If somebody breaks a leg, we got to carry him on that cot all the way back to the cars and then take him to the hospital. And, you're talking about 5-6 hours to get somebody to just the car, not including the hospital.
Wow. So I mean, obviously clearly irresponsible, but y'all survived it, but that sounds already a little bit traumatic to try to like do this, and this is all under the guise of this is helping you with leadership.
Yeah. So I mean, this the exercise is like, don't let your teammate fall, or like their life rests in your hands, which is a great metaphor. But when you take it to the point of it being literal, and there's literally their life is in your hands, and there's no reason for it. Like if I needed to carry you on my back across 5 mountains to get you to a hospital because you were poisoned, sure, I will do it, but is it necessary? No. Is it going to happen ever? Probably not. And, is there really a reason for me to be carrying someone and putting their life in unnecessary harm to drive home a point about leadership? I don't think so.
Wow. Okay. So how long did it take to get to the were y'all going to the top of the mountain?
To the top of the mountain. I mean, it took all day. I believe we woke up at sunrise and then we headed out probably about an hour to an hour and a half after that. And then of course we had our packs and our tents and stuff like that on our person as well. So that was actually another part of it was most of us were carrying 2 backpacks because there's only 5 of us. So there's one person on the cot, 2 people carrying the cot, and then the other 2 people are carrying 2 backpacks, or in some cases 3 backpacks, depending.
Wow. Okay. So you get to the top, I assume, and I mean, y'all are nursing some wounds, but y'all get to the top and just kind of crash. Is that how that day ends?
Well, it was like we made it to the top. That's great. Let's pack up the cot and we're all going to walk down this mountain. So then we walk down the mountain after that because you can't camp on top of the mountain. There's not enough room.
So were y'all hiking in the dark at this point?
Yeah, we definitely hiked in the dark. I mean, we had headlamps and stuff like that, but
But you just went up. I mean, that's physically insanely grueling, even for a nature enthusiast.
Absolutely, and I will say, it's not the most physically intense thing that I did there. I mean, I personally did a marathon, and we did a half Ironman at the end of the year, and they did that each year. So, I mean, we were constantly running, hiking, biking, building strength, stamina, everything.
Well, so that's day 1. Well, it's a long day though. So what happens next?
So next is kind of just like they just did like a rest and relaxation recovery. They took us to like a cabin instead of making us camp, so that we could recuperate and stuff like that. So that was nice. And then, after that event, then comes kind of like what we've been building up to, which is the big story, because that wasn't even it. So I will say, despite all of this, I do not consider any of this traumatic. It doesn't keep me up at night. I actually thought it was kind of fun. But that's because that's the kind of person I am. I am already that person inside that enjoys doing the absolutely insane survival stuff and putting myself in ridiculous situations that get your adrenaline pumping or are super stressful. So I'm already there. But I mean, if it wasn't me, trying to put myself in someone else's shoes, it would absolutely be traumatic.
Gotcha. Well, and I'm okay with you obviously perceiving your own story however you want. But yeah, go on. Tell me what you've told me once, but I'm ready to hear it again. Tell me what happened next.
So, the next event, oh gosh, what was it called? Missions training. Right. It was supposed to be our missions training event. Now, none of us knew about the event prior to actually going. The event was kind of like a secret thing. So, we just kind of had normal days after that until this event. I had a normal day. We worked out pretty hard. We did our classes and then I went home. About the time that I got in the bed, around like 11 o'clock, I think I was sleeping a little later at that point, 11 o'clock, 11:30 maybe, one of the second years came into my room, just out of the blue, and he was like, look, you need to pack up as much stuff as you need for a few days in a backpack and come with me. And I'm like, okay, I'm not going to question you, but I'm doing it. And so I packed up very poorly, I might add, about 3 days worth of stuff that I thought I might need. And then we were out by like midnight. So they drive us to the church where we spent the majority of our time. It's where we did all of our classes and everything like that. So drove us to the church. That was nothing abnormal. And then we went into the main sanctuary area, and there was like row lighting and stuff like that. It was weird. And we walked up, and they're like, listen, this is the big event. This is missions training. This is the biggest event for us that you'll ever do in 24/7. This is really our staple. It's what's going to put all of your training to the test. It's what's going to test you to the limit, blah, blah, blah. And to be fair, they did say in the beginning of this, if there's ever a point where you're uncomfortable, you can say break scenario, and we'll stop everything and we'll talk to you about what's going on. Now, that being said, historically speaking, when people go through intense adrenaline pumping moments or intense traumatic moments, the first thing that's on their mind is not always, oh, this is fake. This is I need to say break scenario. It does usually reach a point where things begin to feel very real.
Yeah, no, I was going to ask that if you weren't going to bring that up, because, me knowing the whole story, I'm sure it started out with, oh, this is fun training, but I think based on what you've told me, it kind of gets dark. So they bring you to the church. What happens next?
So after that, and by the time that we leave, I'm assuming it was about 1 a.m., maybe about an hour passed, and I knew it was 12 when we got there. So after that, they handed us fake passports that had our, ID and like numbers and date of birth and stuff like that on the passport. And they handed us a piece of paper that said visa, and it was like supposed to be a visa for another country. We were supposed to be flying to, quote unquote, India, for a missions trip. That was like the goal of the whole exercise. So they put us in a van where they had like black curtains on the inside of the van. And like I said, about 1 a.m. And we couldn't see, the driver's seat. We couldn't see out the windows. We couldn't see behind us. So we're just in these rows in the van, and they're driving us around. So they started playing plane noises. And I seriously have no idea how much time passed, because the plane, I heard that plane take off and glide and then land, and I knew that it was about 30-minute long audio, or I thought I did. There was no way to tell time, because they took all of our watches and all of our phones and everything like that. So there was literally no way to gauge anything. So I listened to it loop a few times, maybe 4. So I think it was a couple of hours. It could have been longer. But they just drove us around, and then eventually they stopped, and let us out. And when we came out, and this is where everything kind of gets crazy. So when we came out, there was spotlights in our face. We were in like a giant open field. There was a plastic fold-out table at like probably, I don't know, maybe 100, 150 feet away from us. And on both sides, there was men in uniform with guns, like AR-15s and AK-47s. And a couple of them had just handguns, like Glocks and 1911s. So we get out of the van and we're like, what is going on? And so they, tell us to line up. They instruct us to line up and present like our paperwork, our visas and our passports and stuff like that. So over the course of about the next 3 hours, we were circulating back through that line. A few of us got through, a few of us didn't. Because what they had done is they had intentionally messed up our birth dates, our birthdays and like our social security numbers or like our passport numbers on purpose, and messed with things, like messed our names up so that we would have to look at the passport and like memorize what the information on our passport was, which ultimately, I don't understand the point of the exercise. The exercise is remember the information that's on your passport. But altogether, why do you have to make us sit there for 3 hours in a rotating line to drive that point home? You can just tell us to make sure we know the information.
Wow. Okay. So what are? I have two questions. One,
Sure.
the guns looked real, right? Like these were not like they didn't have an orange tip on them or anything, right?
So I have a lot of experience in airsoft since then. It is almost impossible to distinguish an airsoft gun from the real thing if you buy the right product. And then you can remove the orange tips and you can replace them with actual flash suppressors or muzzle brakes or silencers. And yes, they looked. How are we supposed to know other than the fact that there's just people with guns that look very real?
Wow. And you did not recognize these people, correct? These were strangers?
No. Everybody that was a part of this whole ordeal were completely new faces. So what they actually did is they got a bunch of people to volunteer for this that none of us had ever met before. And they also got some people that were from the Texas program to come up and help them run the program. So we didn't recognize anybody. And the few people that we probably would have recognized were all in ski masks. So again, impossible.
Gotcha. And what are the instructors are present for this? Are they doing nothing? Are they helping? What is their role?
The only time I only saw the instructor, I believe, one time. And usually they were trying to keep back out of sight. Every now and then you might catch a glimpse of them, or they might pass you by or something like that. They were observing, but again, after 3 hours in a blacked out van listening to a plane on repeat and then getting floodlights in your face and standing in line for 3 hours, the last thing that you're doing is looking for the instructor amongst a bunch of people.
Yeah, so at this point you're already kind of believing it's real. Like there's not as much, there might be some cognitive awareness that okay, this is a scenario that I've trained for, but you're pretty immersed in it, huh?
I mean, yeah, really by the time that we got out of that line, it was already starting to hit home pretty hard. I think, we didn't get out of the line until the sun started coming up. So we were there for a long time, and the whole time that we were there, they're yelling at us, they're yelling profanities and stuff like that, which was actually interesting to me. There was an extreme amount of use of profanity throughout the entire event by the people that were playing the guards, which is interesting to me for a lot of reasons. But anyway, that's beside the point.
Well, is it? That's notable. That's really notable that I assume profanity was pretty frowned upon in your church in general. So
yes,
that's odd.
Profanity in general was pretty frowned upon. But again, I think that the goal of this program was to get you immersed, and the best way to do that is to act like real people. And you can't act like real people without talking like real people. So, and not to say that they weren't real people, but you know what I'm saying, like people that would be in the military or guardsmen, and you're doing some weird shady stuff, and then they're gonna shout some profanity at you because you're being negligent or stupid about something. So it makes sense.
I guess we'll go to the next phase soon here, but the last thing I'll ask is so you've been told this before all this happened, you were told it's missions training and that you were going to India, and that's about all the information you have, right? You don't.
That's really it. They told us that we had a contact on the other side of the once we got through airport security, which is what we were supposed to be going through at the time. Once we got through airport security, our contact would take us to where we need to go.
Okay. All right. So y'all get through this confusing mess of trying to, like, this weird kind of imagined version of customs, I guess, in
Right.
an unfriendly country, which
Yeah.
I mean doesn't exist anywhere, but except the mind of certain Christians. But you go through that, and then what's next?
So what happens next is they take us to this small hut that's been built out of log timber. It looks like it's been recently built, but I mean, they made it look, stick sleeves, really bad. It's really bad living conditions. And then they started handing us food. Well, none of us had eaten in a long time, so we're like, okay, we'll take the food. And I guess I should also say, they did instruct us that because other countries believe that the only thing that Americans do is eat food, to turn down food from anyone in the entire scenario would be like insulting. I don't think that's 100% accurate, but I mean, I don't know if you've been to another country.
I have actually, and I've had that. I have had that talk in my missions training, because I've done some international missions myself, but they do say, don't turn down food. It's considered rude. But that's not to any extreme degree. I mean, you usually are being offered food at times where you would eat, so you wouldn't turn it down typically. So okay, so go ahead, keep going.
So this was so they handed us it was lentil curry, lentil rice curry. So it was basically like jasmine rice and lentil beans in like a curry sauce. But it was horrible. It was the lentils were uncooked, the rice was halfway cooked. It was very, I mean, the spices were it was very bad. And I mean, what we were supposed to do is choke it down. I do believe a few of us vomited, and we were supposed to just keep eating. So we just ate until
okay,
the bowl
that is
empty.
Inaccurate.
Right.
That's the one thing I'll say. In my I have eaten a lot of great food internationally, and they obviously cook it better than we would.
People make food that they're not able to keep down. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's not a real thing. Yeah. Wow. Okay, so we're already pretty psychologically doing some strange things and are all five of you present for this?
Yes, all five of us are present.
Okay, gotcha. So you choke down this food barely, with some vomiting on the side. Then what?
So then they tell us, that they have some contacts that we're supposed to go meet. We have to go do this thing. We have to fetch quest. I believe the first thing that we had to do was that we had to go build homes for people that didn't have any homes. So they took us in kind of like a roundabouts way, and we're like on this like 100-something acre farm, kind of, right? So there's like a barn, and there's like animals, and there's stuff, and there's like a pond in the middle, and we're like, so you are trekking some distance. It's not huge, it's not great, it's not vast, but it is some. So they take us over to this area that's kind of cleared out, and we have to build these houses out of literally nothing. So I think we had to build 4. So they had some like random sheets and some like random string and stuff that we could use that was there. But other than that, we had to just find what was around. So after, about 20 minutes a piece of cobbling these horrible, non-livable homes for these people out of nothing, each person offers us food each time. And it's rude not to take food. The first time was duck feet. So we ate pickled duck feet. And then the next time was partially cooked quail eggs with the fetuses still intact.
Oh my
Um,
god, that's like gooey duck or whatever, right? Like this.
yeah,
Oh,
it's
oh
it
my
is it
gosh.
is a foreign food, but it's just it wasn't done right.
Right. Yeah. I just want to keep chiming in to basically say what the fuck because because I have built homes for people before on missions field. Guess what? You have nails and frames and like real things to build houses.
Lumber.
Yeah, it's crazy that it's this sort of weird Christian fanfic that's going on that
Right.
of like, oh, this is what it'll be like. This is nothing what missions is like, but
Right.
obviously it's only going to get worse. So
I
keep
think,
going.
yeah, it does only get worse. And I know that we're already almost at an hour, so I'm trying to kind of get through some content as fast as I can. So I don't want to keep you over too much.
Well, be
But
detailed. I don't want any detail unturned. So keep going.
okay. Okay. So I believe after that it was rice noodles with tuna, like tuna from like a can. But the rice noodles were overcooked. So they were extremely like slimy and just bad. I don't know if you've had overcooked rice noodles, but they're bad.
Oh, it's the worst. Yeah.
Right. So we had that, and then after that, the final home that we built, they gave us fish heads. And to my surprise, the fish head was the best part. It actually was not that bad. And then after that, we were supposed to get the townsfolk together and do some kind of short sermon. So we kind of cobbled something together amongst all of us and chose a presenter. And then, after that, we answered questions, to which a lot of the questions were a lot of the questions that I had no answer to. So I just thought it was really ironic that a lot of the questions that they asked were just questions in general that I didn't feel like either A, got really good answers, or B, didn't get answered at all.
Real quick, sorry. These are questions about Christianity?
Sure, it might just be like, well, it's questions about Christianity from the perspective of someone that has no idea about Christianity. So they're feigning ignorance as posing as a, citizen or whatever. They've never heard the name Jesus, and these are the kind of questions that they're coming up with.
Okay, gotcha.
So after that, we went to, right, the market was next. So the next thing that we did was the market. The market is just like a giant long barn where they have a bunch of tables and stuff set up and a bunch of people selling items. So they gave us beads, to represent money. They gave us like 300 rupees is what they called it, which is, it is an Indian currency, but it's not beads. I'll tell you that. So they gave us the currency, and then they said, look, that you're here to buy 2 chickens. So we're like, okay, cool. We're just going to buy 2 chickens. We all go in, we get the 2 chickens, we come out. And when we come out, a lot of us realize that our stuff is missing. So the whole point is they steal the stuff that's out of your backpack. The idea, I guess, there was that when you're in a crowded area, you don't know what people are going to be doing or touching or anything, so you need to keep an eye on your belongings. I get it, but we did spend 4 hours haggling with people to try to get our stuff back, and a lot of us ended up with less stuff than we had when we went in there, because we had to haggle for important items like a sleeping bag or a tent or like our passport. I believe we spent all of our money and we gave away a scarf and somebody's shirt in order to get a passport.
Wow. I mean, yeah, I have a lot of thoughts. My jaw has dropped. It took a while, but my jaw has dropped. It's just crazy. Okay, and so you get through this market. Did you get your 2 chickens?
Yeah, we did, and these are not like fake chickens. They are real chickens. So, we had to hold the chickens upside down and take them around for the rest of the things that we were doing. And then we get to this next point, which, and mind you, we haven't slept any of this time. So a lot of us are running on basically empty. We've eaten, but it's not been good, and a lot of us have vomited it up again. So we get finally to the last one of our next contacts who is going to get us some Bibles, and we need to take these Bibles across the border. However, on the other side of the border, Bibles are not allowed. It's, a forbidden subject or whatever. So I'm not sure how realistic that is to real life.
Pretty
Right.
unrealistic.
Pretty
but I will say, like, that's a common rumor among Christians,
Sure.
that there's all these countries where the Bible's not allowed. That's not really that much of a real thing. There's certainly places of the world that are less friendly to it, but like, it's not as dramatic as they'll make it sound.
I'm pretty sure that you'll actually get more in trouble for having drugs in India than you will a Bible. I'm pretty sure you get the death sentence if you take weed into India. I heard that.
I don't know about that, but
sure.
but India. But yeah, I know you can definitely have a Bible in India. That's
right.
that's a weird scenario. But so y'all haven't slept at this point or anything, right?
No. So the contact he gives us each a box, and inside three of the boxes are stacks and stacks of Bibles, and inside two of the boxes are bricks. I don't know why the other two boxes were filled with bricks. I think they just ran out of Bibles, but the other two boxes were filled with bricks. So before we go, he kind of explained everything that we needed to cross the border at a certain place. And then once we got there, we would go meet up with some people, at a church that was being constructed, and we would hand them the Bibles. So before we left, we killed the chickens, we plucked the chickens, we skinned the chickens and got the breast meat out, and we washed the breast meat in the pond, and then cooked it and ate it.
Yeah, my vegan heart is hurting, but but okay. So but you're immersed in a scenario, and honestly, if you hadn't done that, you probably wouldn't have got food.
No, yeah, that was where I was at. Like my mental state at this point, my mental state is right. If I don't kill this chicken, I'm not going to eat. Who knows when I'll eat? I have to kill this chicken. So that's my mental state at this current point in time.
Are you able to remember the words break scenario at this point?
I don't think it even crossed. I actually, during this entire time, I don't even think it crossed my mind that it was a scenario. I mean,
and no one else did, right? Like no one at any point said it.
I don't know. Okay, there was actually one time, and I'll get there. But it was an extenuating circumstance.
Sure.
And it was my fault.
Okay, well then keep going. I'm sure we'll get there.
So we get these boxes, and at this point, night had fallen. So it had been from midnight until now. The night has fallen again. We haven't slept. We've ate terrible food. We just ate. So we take the Bibles in the boxes. Each of us has a box. We gave the girl the lightest box, not because we thought she was the weakest, but because she asked, and so we said okay. So we climb over a fence, I think it was even like a barbed wire fence. We climbed over a barbed wire fence, and then we started hiking through the woods. About 300 feet from the fence, all of a sudden, out of the grass, the tree line broke, and there was just an open field of really tall grass. And out of this tall grass came like spotlights and men that were like in camo with guns, and a Jeep like came up, and they were shining lights in our faces, and they were like, get on the ground, drop what you have in your hands, get on the ground. So we all kind of like place our boxes on the ground, and we're kind of, on our knees. And they're like, what are you doing here? And we're like, oh, we were just crossing through. We were just passing through because we don't want to get caught. They're not supposed to know that we have these Bibles in these boxes. So over the next, I'm going to say 3 hours. I'm fairly certain it was probably not that long. It was probably about 2, but in my mind, it definitely felt like 3. They sort of like interrogated us. They asked us where we were coming from, where we were going on just kind of like a repeat, who we were affiliated with, if we were hiding anything, stuff like that. And if we didn't answer their questions in enough time or anything, they would make us hold these boxes over our head. And they're full of books, so they're extremely heavy. And if you dropped the box at all, they would get up in your face and they would yell in your face, that you better hold that box up, blah, blah, blah.
And sorry, are you indoors at this point or
No,
outdoors?
We've been outdoors this whole time.
Gotcha. And so they're interrogating you. Did they separate y'all, or are y'all
no,
kind of
we're
together?
Actually
being
still all together. They're just they're coming up to each person side by side, screaming in their face, asking questions.
Wow.
Shining lights in your face.
And this is lasting hours at this point.
Right. It's lasting hours. Yes. We definitely held the boxes up above our head on believe about a 15-minute rotation, and then we held them out in front of us for another 15-minute rotation, and it just went up and forward, up and forward, up and forward for about
and again
an hour
at this point your mental state is like, this is 100% real.
Right. I mean, and you'll see that here in just a second, how immersed I was.
Okay.
Like, I can't explain to you exactly the kind of, other than the fact that I just legitimately thought that I was there. Like, this is reality, like there was no doubt in my mind that this was happening. Like, if I made the wrong move, I was going to die. Like, I just, they were going to shoot us. It was going to be the end. So that's kind of my mental state at this point, because we had just been already through so much and you're so exhausted. Remember, I went to bed at 11:30 and he walked in my room at 11:30. I hadn't even gotten sleep from that night before. So we're 100% sleep deprived. Once you get to a certain point of sleep deprivation, you become extremely able to be influenced. I know a lot of people don't know about torture methods, but after my experience there, I did a lot of research into torture methods, and sleep deprivation is torture method like number 1.
Right. Yeah, it's the first thing. Get them tired, get them delirious. Yeah. Okay, so gosh, so you keep being interrogated, where are you from, yada yada, and none of your answers are satisfying. I'm sure it at this point feels like, well, shoot, I'm out of answers. Like, there's nothing really to move forward. So what happens next?
So next they're like, listen, you take your boxes, you go back across the border, and we don't want to hear from you. And I'm like, we literally can't go back at this point. I mean, we're supposed to get these things across. Like, this is our objective. This is our goal, right? And that's what's rushing through my mind. So I did the dumbest thing that I probably could have ever done. I just said, I don't care. I'm not going anywhere. And, I'm like screaming in this guy's face. And it eventually reaches a boiling point where I'm screaming at him. He's screaming at me, and he pulls a gun out and holds it right to my forehead. And he's like, if you don't shut up, I will shoot you. And I don't know why, but I was just like, I don't care. And, at that point, they're like, okay, everybody get down on the ground. So we got face down on the ground, and they started discussing something. I don't know what, but I whispered to my right to one of my one of the guys that was involved, and I said, look, listen, when I go, grab the girl and start running. Like, just book it towards that, across the field. We got to get over there. And I freaking grabbed one Bible out of the box and I just bolted. And he grabbed the girl, and we both bolted, and we were just running full on sprinting through the grass. And we eventually came to another barbed wire fence, and I helped them over. And as I was helping them over, I got like tackled from behind and face into the ground. Like, then this is where he said break scenario. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, break scenario. I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, look, this is not real. Like, break scenario. You guys were not supposed to run. You were supposed to go back across the fence. And I'm like, okay.
Wow.
And so like, I have this like existential crisis moment where I'm like, none of this was real. Like, where am I? You know?
Yeah. I mean, first off, being tackled, that's messed up. But I mean, obviously all of this is messed up, but that's clearly like, that's a new line, right? Where someone crossed the line tackling
physical, you. Absolutely.
Yeah. And you were so immersed, and in some ways you were doing what you were trained to do. And now that you're doing something you were trained to do, they're saying, oh, wait, you were supposed to do this a different way. That's pretty telling that all of this was pretty manipulative, and they were expecting some pretty specific things.
Yeah. I mean, they definitely wanted a specific result out of every single thing that you did. And I mean, this really speaks to my entire experience in the entire Leadership Academy, which I'm sure I'll have to come on another segment to talk about the rest of it.
Okay, so you've tackled the break scenario. They're saying, oh, you're supposed to go back over the fence. Then what?
Right. So we end up spending some time to try to find the other guy and the girl, and they had like basically like wedged themselves in like a creek or something to like try to avoid being seen. So I mean, they were both obviously terrified, and we get back and we get over, and then they're like, okay, we're going to take you to like a campsite. So they take us to this campsite, and I mean, when we went to sleep, the sun was starting to come up, and when we woke up, I mean, to my knowledge, I only got 2 hours. I'm fairly certain that we only got 2 hours of sleep. I'm very, very positive that it was a short amount of time.
Wow. So not enough time to actually rest, just enough time to stay alive, basically.
Yeah, basically, yeah. Just enough for you to get, you didn't in a REM cycle, you didn't get any kind of like decent sleep. It was just enough to close your eyes and then kind of get that second wind. So, after that, it was a few more things. Like we went and we helped construct a church. We went and we talked to a supposed like witch doctor, and tried to convert a witch doctor. So when I did it, because I was actually in 24/7 for a second year. So when I helped to host, what I did, is I put chicken blood everywhere, and stuff like that. But they just did a little bit more simple, where it was just like a hut and like a man who was supposed to be like a witch doctor and like saying like things that are bad, or what a stereotypical Christian would describe a witch doctor looking like.
Wow.
Right. Which is basically just like the cartoon version of what a witch doctor is.
Wow. And so how long are you there trying to convert this person?
Probably a couple hours. I mean,
okay.
Each of these events was like each of these things that we did took a couple of hours, a few hours at a time.
Okay.
And then after that, they said, look, you're going to take the next 1 hour to prepare a sermon that needs to last 45 minutes, and you're going to present to someone. So we said, okay. So we take the next hour, we present, or we kind of create our sermons, and there's 5 of us, 45 minutes, that's at least a few 4 hours, 3-4 hours, worth of speaking. So they take us into the barn again, but this time it looks different because they've reorganized things to kind of be like a church. And it was just kind of, in my mind, I didn't even recognize it as the same place. I was just like, oh, this is a totally different place. Because again, I was at that point, I had reached another point where I was like so immersed. I was like, there's just no
So
way.
even
This is not
after the
real.
scenarios, has been broken once, you're like
Yes.
back in it almost seamlessly. You're like, I'm
Almost
immersed. This is real.
seamlessly. It's like it never happened. Right. I mean, I honestly think it was the sleep deprivation just really setting in. Not quite hallucinations yet, but there is a point later.
Wow.
So we present to this person, and while we are in the barn, the sun sets. So it is now dark. I believe we had a 1 hour rest period during that day. So total of about 3 hours of sleep. So we present, and then once everybody's done presenting, all of a sudden we hear ATVs and like the revving of motorcycles and dirt bikes and stuff outside, and like flashlights start shining through like the slats in the barn, and we're like, oh crap, they found us. They know we're here. They know that we're practicing Christianity in a church setting. It's like not allowed, they told us that we would be killed if they found out. So, the pastor's like, go, and here's kind of a messed up part. The pastor at the end of my sermon, right before this started happening, gave me his scarf, and I still have the scarf, but he gave me his scarf. And just at that moment, I was like, oh God, like that really set me in, because someone gave me something personal of theirs because they by something that I did. Right. So it just immersed me even more. Right.
Yeah.
So he opens up like this piece of the barn and like lets us crawl, like army crawl underneath the wall. And as I'm leaving, and like I think someone was behind me, he closes the barn and he's like taking the fall for us. Like they burst into the barn and they like arrest him or whatever. And so then at that point we start running with this other person that was with us, who's our guide or whatever. So they start running and we're running blind through the woods. None of us had flashlights or anything like that. So it's pitch black. We're running through the woods and we're getting chased by like cars with spotlights and dirt bikes with like people on dirt bikes with flashlights. And we like run for a bit and then we'll hide in like some tall grass and wait for about 30 minutes or so. Just long enough for you to like almost fall asleep, and then like, okay, we gotta go, and then we start running again for another like hour or so, and we're running, and then we stop and we like get under some logs or some leaves or whatever we can find to like hide from these people. And this goes on for until sunrise. At sunrise, we make it back to the original contact point. So the guy where we went to his house. So when we went to his house and ate his horrible food in the very beginning of the story, he was like a pastor and he had a wife who was supposed to be pregnant. So we get there, and when we arrive, his house is on fire. It is literally that whole huge stick log house that they made was just up in enormous flame.
Oh my gosh! Like real flame, no special effects here.
No
it's
special effects. It was completely on fire. And it was probably the biggest fire I've ever seen in my whole life. I've never seen like a house fire or anything, but that was if you've been to a huge bonfire, like times 10. It was massive.
Wow.
And so there's a bunch of guys with guns all around, and they like make us all get down on our knees and stuff. Like we're basically caught at this point. They zip tie our hands behind our backs. They make us get down on our knees, and they start talking to the pastor, and they are like telling him, you're practicing Christianity, that's not allowed here, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, I don't care, God is my king, or whatever he says. He says some Christian-y thing that you're supposed to say before you kick the bucket, right? So, and his pregnant wife is like bawling on the ground in like a fetal position. And they've like got guns pointed at her, and it was insane. And then
Wow.
guys line up behind each of us, and he makes the pastor get down on his knees, and he says, "Renounce your faith right now, or I'm going to put a bullet in your head." And right at that moment, they cover our heads with bags, and we hear a loud gunshot. I mean, legitimate gunshot. I don't know what it was, but I knew it was a gunshot.
Wow. Let's pause just for a second.
Sure.
For a second. So in your mind, you just saw a house fire, like a legitimate fire, no special effects again. There's nothing fake about this. You saw a real fire. You saw someone who is, I don't know if this is just a great professional actor or what this person's disorder is, but a supposedly pregnant woman crying. And then there's this big moment of renounce your faith or die. You're covered, your eyes are covered, and you hear a gunshot. In your head, all of this is real. There's nothing fake about any of this.
Absolutely. I mean, I 100%, we all thought he died. I mean, the girl that was a part of the Leadership Academy that was right next to me immediately she started bawling, like, uncontrollably. And like, I'm starting to tear up. Like, I'm like, oh my God, like, this person is dead. We did this to this person. Like, we led them here. I feel like responsible for this. So
wow.
It was just like a huge, another moment that just like solidified in my mind the fact that this is real. This is really happening. And so really from this point on is where, in my opinion, things get crazy, because it hasn't really gotten crazy yet.
Like, yeah, it hasn't been crazy yet, you freak. Of course it's been insane up to this point. It's crazy that the story gets worse and worse because it feels like it can't, and then it does. Yeah, I swear, don't look at the clock. This is incredible, the story, so please keep going.
Okay. So they get us in a van, and again, we kind of do the van thing, and they have our hands like tied behind our backs to where it's like in a really uncomfortable position. So sitting down in the van is not really an opportunity for you to sleep, because you're just at that point where it's like so uncomfortable that it would just be impossible. So, they drive us around for I don't know how long. It was at least an hour, maybe a little longer. And we just hear like, rocks tumbling and like dirt flying, and as we're like speeding down this road and stuff. And then finally we get to a location. We still have bags over our heads. So they pull us out, bags still on our heads, hands still zip tied. They start
and in your best estimation, how many hours has it been?
Probably only one. It wasn't very long.
Gotcha. Okay.
So as they're bringing us in, we're like kind of trying to like figure out what's going on. So they stand us in a room, all of us, and so we kind of are all bumping shoulders. So we're kind of like, with our hands zip tied, we're like touching each other, like trying to figure out who's who and like what's going on. And I like find the girl's hand and I like squeeze it. I'm like, okay, she's okay. Like she's safe for now, or like she's as safe as it can be. And then they start separating us and they put us each into individual rooms. So I thought they were playing music, but once everything kind of resolved itself, they were actually playing static. So I'm in this room by myself with a bag over my head, and they start standing us up and sitting us down on our butts with our hands still zip tied behind our backs. That's not changed. So we're sitting down on our butts with our legs straight out in front of us, which is super uncomfortable if you've ever done that. And standing us up on a 15-minute rotation, I think. I don't actually know how much time passed at this point. I lost it. Like, I lost complete track of time. I, at one point, this went on for so long, I at one point thought that I had escaped. I literally had like a hallucination dream where I had escaped and gotten the girl that was a part of the group, and we had gotten outside, and then they came inside and sat me down, and I'm like, okay, none of that was real. Like, that was all in my head. That was the most real thing I've experienced over the last 2 hours or however long it's been.
Wow. So a very real hallucination. Like,
oh yeah,
was,
I mean,
yeah,
completely vivid. So at this point, I'm struggling to even know what's real anymore. And finally, after I don't know how long, I sat down however many times. Sitting down 20 times is times 15. 15 minutes each.
300 plus, yeah.
Yeah, it was it's what felt like forever. And I don't even know if that was how many times I sat down. It just felt like it went on forever. So eventually they pull me out and I start walking, and they start walking me down a very long flight of steps. And they finally take the bag off my head, and everyone is around me. So me and the 4 others in the thing. And then the pregnant wife is in the corner sobbing while we're all down there. And her stomach is covered in like blood. And
oh my God.
Yeah.
So they're reinforcing the myth that this guy has been killed.
Yeah, and that her baby is now dead, like, inside of her.
Oh my God. Okay, keep going. I'm saving my questions till the end, so keep going.
So we go over, and we're like consoling her, or doing our best to console her, and she's got like bruises like all over her face, like she's been beaten to like a bloody pulp. And eventually somebody comes down and they drag her up, and like literally if there wasn't 2 other guys there that had guns, we would have fought. I mean, it would have been a full-on fight, because me and the three of the other guys were just like, no, you're not taking her. And they were like, if we don't take her now, we'll just kill all of you right here.
And you think the guns are real?
Right. There's nothing that tells me that the guns aren't real. They all look very convincing, and we did hear a gunshot when bags were over our heads. So at this point, yeah, the guns are real, the only conclusion that you can draw is that this is really happening. It got to the point where it forced your brain to just accept the fact that this was what was happening, and you didn't have a choice, right? So they take her up, and after about, I don't know, a minute or so, we hear a gunshot. And then they come down the stairs and they start grabbing us one by one and taking us up there, and we keep hearing gunshots. And I was like the second to the last. So they take me up these stairs and put a bag over my head again. And they put me down on my knees, and they're like, if you don't renounce your faith right now, we are going to kill you. And I'm like, I am fairly certain that the only thing that I said was just go ahead, because I'm not going to do that. And then there was a gunshot, and the bag got lifted over my head, and it was like a house, and there was candles lit everywhere, and all my friends were there, and like everybody was around me, and they were like patting me on the back and like hugging me and stuff like that. And I'm like so confused. I don't think that the fact that this wasn't real hit me until I saw someone else come up and kneel down, and I was like, oh, this is fake. Like, I'm not witnessing what happens when I die. Like, this is all an act. Like, this has all been a charade. And, like, all of a sudden, everything came, like, in a wave of, like, realization that I had just been doing this weird thing this whole time.
Did you cry? Because I want to.
I absolutely, I was in tears. I mean, there's no way that I couldn't have been.
Yeah. I mean, my goodness. Okay, so did an instructor come up and say, "Good job! Like, y'all passed the test. This is true leadership." Like, what happened? What was there? Or did they just kind of play it off like, "Oh yeah, good job. Like, whatever. This was normal." Like, what was kind of the tone afterwards?
I think the tone after was like, congratulations. You really passed what 24/7 is all about. You passed the ultimate test in your faith, right? The ultimate test in your faith. Is what 24/7 is about. It's about accepting God, like making sure that this is what you want or whatever. But I mean, that's not a true test of your faith, right? Like, faith is tested every day. Faith is not tested in a single moment. It's easy to say, it's easy to die for a cause, right? Being a martyr is easy, but living as an example is really hard. So I don't think that the right message was necessarily sent.
Yeah, what was the message? Because, like, what was supposed to be the result of all of this? Were y'all supposed to go to, like, a really anti-Christian country? Was that what they were preparing you for?
So at the end of the year, we did have a missions trip, and that's what everything was supposed to prepare us for. However, the mission trip was to Scotland, and I didn't get to go.
To me, this is the punchline of everything.
Right. It's almost like a joke. And that's kind of how everything felt at the end of the year to me. I just felt like not only was the entire experience that I had gone through a giant joke, but there was no point to put myself through it. And the only thing that my peers had to say about me were complaints. I mean, we all have things with people, right? Like, there were things that other people in the organization did that I didn't like. But I mean, what are you going to do? That is, people have faults. People have problems. The point of, like, being a true leader is to help somebody overcome a problem, right? But that's not what they did, right? It was more about the faith thing, and I can expound on that whole incident at a later junction because I have a lot to say.
I'm sure you do. One thing, for just one more point of clarification, have you talked to anyone? Have you talked to any of the other four, or have you talked to, like, anyone else in the world who has experienced anything similar to this?
I've never met anybody that's experienced anything like this aside from the people that were in it. I've never heard of anybody doing anything like this, other than military boot camp. I mean, like, and, people may get upset at me, for saying that, but that's the closest thing that I can equate it to. I've never been through military boot camp. I'm not in the military, nor do I claim to be. But I do know a lot of people's experiences in boot camp is similar to that. You do have to go through some form of psychological torture and rigorous training and sleepless nights in some form. That is what it's about. It's about, that's what the military is about overcoming those odds so that you can be the best soldier that you can be. But we weren't being soldiers, right? We were being leaders of a church.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And again, all of this, and then you go to Scotland, like one of the most Christian countries in the world. Like, it's crazy.
Has one of the highest numbers of Catholic.
Right. So first off, we've used this word a lot. So I'll just ask it to be very clear. Do you think you were tortured?
I mean, I can't tell you that I wasn't.
I think you were. My disclosure, I think you were tortured.
Through anybody else's perspective, if I were an outside observer, the only thing that this could be classified as would be torture.
Yeah, because torture is not always physical, right? Like there's psychological torture.
Torture is not even physical. I mean,
right.
there are physical aspects to torture, but the most successful tortures are all mental.
Yeah, and you clearly were. I mean, you were at a point of delusion and hallucination. You were believing things that weren't true. That's pretty intense. But let me ask you this: do you think you were kidnapped?
I don't think that anything was done against my will. I think that obviously at any point I could have said I don't want to do this anymore. But again, kind of reiterating a point here, you reach a point where you don't know that that's an option. It's not on the table in your brain.
Well, and I don't want to tell what your experience was because it was yours and I didn't experience it, but dude, like they came in the middle of the night. Did you sign a waiver? I mean, you never had any awareness of what you were signing up for, right?
I mean, we definitely did sign paperwork at the beginning, but what 18-year-old pays attention to what's on the fine print of a document that they're signing?
Oh, I would love to look at that document. I don't know if it still exists even anymore.
I have no idea, but that would be interesting.
Because I mean, some of this is definitely illegal. or at least towing the line.
If you sign on the dotted line, technically.
Well, and that's why I want to see what's on it, because you can't imply threats like that unless someone has basically consented to some kind of role play scenario. So I know you and I haven't had this is maybe the longest conversation you and I have ever had, but I've been trained in de-escalation and I had to role play some pretty intense scenarios for a job I used to have. But you are like the amount of preparation that you undergo before the role-playing scenario, it's pretty obvious. Like, they are pretty explicit. And it sounds like there was some of that in your story, but again, the only time there was a break scenario was the instructors when y'all were basically trying to escape the torture they were inflicting on you.
I mean, yeah, you could put it that way.
And again, that's my perspective. I'm not saying you have to, we're welcome to have different views on it, and yours is more valid because you actually experienced it. But just hearing it secondhand, I'm like, golly, this is terrible what you went through.
So here's what's really going to blow your mind. What's really going to blow your mind is the fact that I actually look back on that memory as a good one.
How? Let me ask it this way. How the fuck are you still a Christian?
So, and I mean, really, I think that's a conversation for another time because it's so much more involved than just,
of course,
this one incident.
Sure.
There were so many opportunities for me to not be one. Let me just say that. There were so many opportunities for me to give up.
Well, no one would blame you. Even
right.
No one after listening to this would blame you.
But I think that somewhere along the lines, I developed my own belief in what Christianity is and what it stands for, and that's what I believe in. I don't think that I believe in the modern version or the modern explanation for Christianity. And there are a few churches that I've found where the idea of Christianity is exactly what I believe it to be, which is, I mean, either you believe in the New Testament or you don't. So if the New Testament is true, right, and you believe that, and you believe that Jesus is your Lord and Savior, and He is also God, and you believe that He died on the cross for your sins, and you accept Him in your heart, that's it, right? It stops there. That is what the requirement is. That's all there is, right? So to believe anything else is folly because it says so in the Bible. If you are to believe all parts of the Bible, why explicitly say, well, then this part of the Bible in the Old Testament, you need to follow that. You need to pay attention to that. I don't, and no one has bothered to give me any kind of explanation other than, oh, well, that's just that's just how this is, right? Or
Yeah.
They pull this from this scripture that's in the Old Testament, or they pull this from this scripture that's in. Show me, after, either at the point of Jesus' death where he said what he came to do, and then he did the act, and then after that, show me somewhere in there where it says that, Anyway, like I said, a whole nother conversation.
Well, and you're welcome to have your own faith. I don't judge people's personal faith on this. I never would. And you don't, you don't like subscribe to any pastor or church leadership anymore, right?
No, and I don't go to church for a reason, because church at this point is a business. Okay.
It is.
I've been a business owner for the last 2 years, and I've done a lot of research into finance and all kinds of stuff, and putting 2 and 2 together is super easy now.
It is.
I mean, just it was a few years ago, I had a conversation with somebody where he was the financial advisor for the church locally, and the church wanted a new basketball court. They already had a basketball court. The floor just needed to be refinished. Well, instead of just refinishing the floor, which would have been like $5,000 or $10,000, something like that, they wanted to install a completely new floor for literally no reason. Like, why not? The audacity of the church to spend people's money on something ridiculous like that, unless the floor is completely unusable, there's no reason, right? And so that is something that I struggle with, is like, and I mean, I don't see a set figure in the Bible, but every pastor that I've ever heard talk says 10% of your income, right?
Right.
You should be donating 10% of your income to the church each year. Okay, so break that down.
Yeah.
If you make $100,000 a year, that's 10, and they're talking about gross. They want gross. They don't want net.
Right.
They say they want gross, 10% of gross income. That's $10,000 a year. Okay, one person's income, like let's say the mortgage on a church is $2,000. That pays for half the mortgage from one person. What are you doing with the other 10 people that make $100,000 a year? What are you doing with their income? You're making 10 grand.
Well, how much money do you think was spent on that academy? I mean, even in just on that event, like probably thousands of dollars, right?
It probably everybody's tuition, at least, if not more.
Right. Because I mean, think of the actors
tickets and also all kinds of stuff like that.
Right. Yeah, it's just such a waste. And for what? What did that training actually accomplish, other than probably traumatizing some people and solidifying some false narratives about other countries?
Right. I mean, that was the point, I think, was just, I think the entire point of the exercise was to say, okay, this is the absolute most extreme scenario you'll ever be put in. Everything else is going to be a cakewalk compared to this, which I resonate with and I understand, but the way that they went about it was very manipulative.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I mean, you seem to not necessarily struggle too much with telling the story, and it doesn't seem to traumatize you too much to talk about it. But even so, these are hard things to talk about, and I'm sure hard things to hear. But I'm glad you're willing to share. Two last questions. So, obviously, this has influenced how you view Christianity now. It's quite different. But you've obviously seen some of the dangers of it. Do you think those dangers still exist to this day? Because I certainly do.
I think that there is definitely a danger I do think that Christianity can be dangerous. I mean, because more often than not, it gets used as a tool to get away with things, or to use it as an excuse to do things, or to not do things, or this is evil or that is evil because of this reason or that reason. But I think that it's super dangerous to not understand the religion that you practice. And I'm a firm believer that 75% to 80% of the people that go to church don't even understand why they're there.
Yeah, that probably plays in because they're probably very susceptible to the same thing that you were, right? Because I mean, you were questioning a lot of things when you entered this program. I don't think when you signed up for Leadership Academy, you were aware of what was going to happen.
No, and I mean, the story about how I got kicked out of my Leadership Academy is a more interesting story than this one. But like I said, that's for another time. I'm already keeping you way too long.
That's okay. I mean, I'm riveted. The next
time that you have me on, we'll talk about that. And that solidified for me the belief that people aren't true, quote unquote, aren't true Christians, that they are just individuals that are broken, and broken people leading broken people is just the blind leading the blind. But, I mean, nobody's going to be perfect, obviously.
Sure.
But,
But not everybody's going to torture.
Right. Not everybody's going to torture you.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Okay. So at the end, I usually ask people to plug things. A lot of my audience actually does live in Georgia based on the analytics I have. And you happen to have a business in Georgia. So do you want to promote what you do for a living?
I do. Absolutely. I build custom golf carts. I own Golf and Garage in Jasper, Georgia. My goal is to build the ultimate golf cart, or the craziest golf cart that anybody's ever seen. I want to be that guy.
What's a good website for people to go to, or how can they get a hold of that stuff?
They can go to golfinggarage.com. That's GOLFIN garage, GARAGE.com.
Finn, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. I think it will be very enlightening, somewhat shocking to many, but I think it's really important to not let these things stay in the dark and to talk about them.
Absolutely. And, I mean, I am still a Christian, so it doesn't necessarily, I mean, I know that your podcast isn't necessarily, I don't see it as necessarily anti-Christian. I just see it more as informative, right?
Well, I appreciate that. I try not to be anti-Christian. I mean, a lot of my greatest friends are Christians. But less and less these days, I have to admit. A lot of them keep leaving.
When you make a podcast that's called this, I mean,
yeah, it happens. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on, and I would love to have you back on, especially to learn what got you kicked out of that academy eventually. I think that would be very interesting.
Yes, that is a very interesting series of stories, and yeah, we'll get to it next time.
All right, sounds great. Thank you so much for coming on, and thank you, listener, for stopping by. If you wish to learn more about what's going on in my life, or wish to purchase my book, go to thecultofchristianity.com. If you'd like to support this podcast, please continue to listen, follow, share, and consider subscribing for additional content. For only $5 a month, you'll have access to 2 additional shows, Parsing Propaganda, where I review and critique Christian content, and Art, where we try some amateur religious trauma therapy. Every subscriber becomes a part of something bigger than this podcast as we endeavor to hold churches accountable, speak the truth boldly, and most importantly, love others despite our pain. Thank you for listening, and remember to keep love in your life, hope in your heart, and searching in your soul.